Hello, everyone. Welcome to Breakdown with Tim and Anne, where we have a breakdown and then we break down all the things that are breaking down. And I am your co-host, Tim McCarthy, and
I am your co-host, Anne Stott.
Hello, Anne.
Hi, Tim.
I'm not going to
I have to say my mood, like if there's a mood chart, it goes up like 20 degrees just seeing you. Very happy to see you.
Totally agree. If you were like, if they strapped us into something that measured the things, we would be like the happy joy thing would be tingling.
Exactly. Here we are, tingling on Breakdown.
Yeah, here we are tingling together. Yes, I feel the same way. You always bring me joy. It's funny because I think it was CJ, my husband, the other day. I mentioned you, or you came up. You often do, and he said she is a delight. She's a delight. I love Anne, and I was like, oh my God, yes, Anne is a delight. So there it is, paying it forward, giving you your flowers.
Wow. Well, that now my mood is off the stratosphere.
Yeah.
But this is a good thing because, there's plenty to break down, and you are on the front lines inside the back rooms of an institution under attack. So I wonder if you...
Let's do our breakdown first before we get...
right.
Because that's going to induce another breakdown for me. Let's just take stock of the moment while we're tingling, and then we can get into Veritas. Yeah. So we don't ask each other how we're doing, right? We're just like, where are you at? Like, what are you feeling?
Where are you at? Yeah. Honestly, I've been still, I feel now like a broken record, but wrestling with knowing we have to be committed to action and everything, and seeing everything that's happening and feeling some defeatism.
Yeah.
I really like, and I don't know what the line is between, and we'll get into this more in detail later, between kind of realism versus fatalism, right? Like, it's like in this political climate, like those two can bleed into each other very quickly. And, I got really sick, which is why it's taken a while for us to get together. I had a bad case of COVID, actually.
Oh, was that what it was? I didn't know that. Yeah, I knew.
Yeah, I tested negative twice, and then I went to my chiropractor and I told him my symptoms. And he was like, "You have COVID," and he said, "It's going around. These are the exact symptoms: the sore throat on fire, which people have been talking about, and then just like this vile cough and exhaustion and runny nose. And the exhaustion, very COVID-like, has taken a while to leave. And so that enabled me to like check out a little bit, actually. I mean, not in a fun way. It's not like I was
partying it up on the beach right.
And this is a weird thing for me to say, but there's relief in checking out. Like, it's like, oh, and then I feel guilty for checking out.
Of course. Right.
It's just like a constant presence that's there now, this reality. And I think it takes a lot of work right now to keep some kind of equilibrium.
Yeah.
It just takes extra work to like keep some equilibrium. So I'm recalibrating, and I'm really looking at, I haven't watched it yet, but there's this 1 Million Rising movement that's happened with some training videos that people I know have been very inspired by. So those are on my list to watch. Kind of getting clear about what actions I want to be taking for the fall. But yeah, still kind of managing the mental overload of it all.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I'm glad you're feeling better in the physical sense, if not the spiritual sense. I knew you were sick, and you were sick for a while. And I was worried about you. I did not realize it was COVID, but you know, a number of people have had this summer. I have not. I've been mercifully spared, and I very much hope that continues because I start teaching again in the next week. It's right at the end of August right now. We're recording on Friday before Labor Day weekend. So, you know, for teachers, Labor Day weekend is one big giant Sunday, and there we go. August is one big giant Sunday too for teachers. But anyway. But I know a lot of people who have actually been sick this summer, and sicker than normal and for longer periods of time. So whether it's COVID or not, but I'm glad you're feeling better. You look better, sound better. You're not hacking up as you were talking earlier in the summer.
I know we had so many dates to record, and I was just like, I'm not going to get through it. Like, it's going to be.
No, we kept hoping, and then you were like, oh no, I'm not hacking through this.
Yeah.
So, anyway, all right, well, good. I'm glad you're feeling better. You know, it's interesting that you use the term equilibrium, because I actually think I'm coming to a point where I feel like equilibrium is like an impossible aspiration in this time, that we actually are just swinging back and forth between whatever kind of extreme we happen to inhabit or be located in at any given time. And it relates to actually how I'm doing, because I had a real I reached some real depths this summer with my mental health that were not fun. Physically, I was fine, but mentally, I was not fine. And I'm not sure I'm still like fully well yet, whatever that means. But I was very aware of the descent. I was like, I felt it. I felt like I was kind of like, I think I mentioned this the last time we got together, that I feel like things were both closing in and slipping away. And for me, that was like powerfully catalyzed by my student Melissa Hortman's assassination at the beginning of the summer, the day of the the night before the No Kings rally. And so there was that moment for me, and we recorded an episode right after that. And that really did something to me that I wasn't ready for. Obviously, who is ready for a political assassination of someone that you know and love, that we've forgotten about. I just wanted to say that, like, you know, people are like, oh, I didn't, what? You know, I'm like, we had 2 political assassinations in the United States, right, earlier this summer, and two attempted ones. Anyway, I'll move on from that. But that kind of induced something that was not good in me, and it was like a reckoning about like who I am and what I'm doing, and it really made me think about my teaching and how I teach and what I teach and the ethics of it in this time, and what I'm asking my students to do when I teach social movements and brave leadership and communication and these kinds of, you know, equity and education, these kinds of things that I teach that I really care about and I believe in. But like, what does it mean to like say, hey, you know, go out in the world and go forth and be brave, if that's what happens? And so, and it was a sequence of things, but that was like that was the gut punch for me. And I just really descended, and I could just feel it. And at some point, and that felt very extreme. And then I happened to have a consulting gig in London, and the hosts of the folks I was working with offered to fly me and CJ, my husband, over to London. And so we went to London, and we, because we couldn't afford it, never had a honeymoon. We never went anywhere after we got married, because we spent everything on the food in the open bar, and had a really good party. So it was fun, but we never went away and had a proper honeymoon. And this wasn't quite that, but like CJ reframed it as that. And so we decided I was going to do the work in London, then we're going to go to Paris for a couple of days, and we were going to check out. We were going to just like go away and check out. And we did. And like, no news and no social media and all of that. And it was lovely. We had a lovely time, and it was like another extreme, right? No, like a total like purge of social media and news in America, and to get to these lovely places in Europe that we hadn't been to in a long time. CJ had never been to Paris, and I'd only been there once in the 90s. So we just did that. So that was like another extreme, but I realized in that extreme abroad, like how miserable I was and am in America. And we're going to talk more about some of that stuff later on, but and how depressed we both were, and how much happier we were. And like, we cuddled, and we like, you know, drank wine at like beautiful cafes and went to museums and walked along the Seine. And it was just, went to a show in Broadway, like in London. And so like and then I was very aware of the lift and like how different it was from that. And so I don't know that equilibrium's like my like go-to goal anymore. I'm just sort of like, how do I, when I'm feeling one extreme, get to the other extreme? And that requires a very intentional set of practices and decisions. And so I decided when I came back, because I realized at the end of July that I had not been to the beach. And as you know, we live blocks from the beach out here at the end of America. And I was like, that's absurd. I need to go to the water. And so I decided to check out in August, and all-female real news diet podcasts rather than news, reading. I've been reading a lot for pleasure. Who knows? And then those kinds of things. So and so that too is like an extreme. And I've spent a lot of time in the pool, actually, at boat slip, because we get access to the pool. And I get my noodle and I get my high noon and I go into the deep end and I'm like, Calgon, take me away. And I do that like regularly for like 2 or 3 hours a day. And sometimes I go with friends and sometimes I go alone and I don't talk to anybody, even though all the boys are preening and prancing around the deck in their Speedos. It's the Speedo summer, not for me, but for some people. And FYI, some people, Speedo is always a choice, and some people make good choices and some people make bad choices. So anyway, that's my shady queen moment in all of this. But I've been floating away and in the pool, and that's been lovely. And giving myself permission to do that. And like, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm like having a high noon and a noodle in the pool. And I'm like, it's okay. I'm going to do this because like it makes my body feel freer and it makes my mind and spirit calmer. So it's like it's an age of extremes rather than equilibrium for me. But
I think that's a really good, like the equilibrium is also in the like radical acceptance of the moment, right? Like this is what it is.
Right.
So there are days we're going to be brought low, and there are days we're going to have to, get the noodle and hang in the pool with the high noon. And like, and it doesn't mean we're going to, find the Buddhist middle way within ourselves necessarily,
No, that's not happening either.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go. It's just a set of intentional practices. I'm much more, the silver lining in this moment is I think I'm much more in touch with my feelings and my body as a result of all that's going on. Like I'm feeling the breakdown, but I'm also like noticing it and paying attention to it, and then trying to pull myself out of it. And I'm trying to figure out like what I can do. Obviously I can't do the pool in the winter, so we're going to have to figure out come fall next week, like what it looks like there. I don't know. Is it reading poetry? Is it not drinking high noon in the middle of the day, which I don't normally do, I should say, but
alert. Day drinking.
I don't day drink every day, but in case anyone's worried.
Day drinking is not a long-term fascist survival solution.
I mean,
we want to be clear here on Breakdown that we are not endorsing
like
day drinking.
Blown, like alcoholism. No, that is not a good thing, generally speaking. However, it is understandable. I also want to extend grace to those of us who from time to time overindulge because we're trying to, numb the pain. It's an age-old struggle.
But I want to say that I am particularly glad that you've given yourself this moment, because you are about to have already been really this last week, and then are now really going to be in the thick of it at Harvard University, an institution you have been a part of for decades now, and you've taught at and worked for decades. And Harvard is one of the major institutions in the United States directly under attack from the Trump administration. And so it would be a huge service, actually, if you would kind of give us an overview of where you think things are and how that's going.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel honestly that our campus is a war zone, and it's felt that way for a while before Trump came back into power. Um, obviously with all of the unrest on campus following October 7th and the Hamas attacks and murders of all those folks in Israel, and then all of what happened after with the war in Gaza and the increasingly genocidal war in Gaza and the eruption yet again of the whatever you call it, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which seems like an understatement at this point. And then, on our campus, also having all of the unrest and the disruption of what I call a coup against President Claudine Gay, our president, following her testimony in Congress. And then there was a concerted campaign, both externally and internally, to get rid of her. And she lasted 6 months. She was Harvard's first Black woman president, second woman, first person of color to be president of the university. So that was all happening together. And then the encampments came and the protests in the spring and the walkout at commencement, which I participated in. So we've been dealing with this now for 2 full years, and we're about to go into a 3rd year, because last year, of course, was the election and then the inauguration. And then very shortly after that, the full frontal assault on Harvard, and which took so many different forms, the most obvious of which is the $2 billion plus defunding of research at Harvard, which has taken an incredible toll on particularly scientific research, like cancer labs and HIV/AIDS research, Alzheimer's research, these kinds of things. Deeply, deeply, deeply destructive for many of my colleagues. And then, and then all the other attacks on all the things that are woke, on our diversity programs, on international students and their visas, on patents that have been produced at Harvard, on different types of professors and faculty. I mean, it is a full frontal and frankly quite surgical assault, which was not on my bingo card. We knew that we were going to be attacked because he has made that known. They have made that known, and they're enabled by actually Harvard graduates, like my former student, Elise Stefanik, who is leading one of the people leading the charge of the investigations in Congress. And I mean, I've had, I know, talk about, it's like, Frankenstein's monster. Like, I mean, you can't make this up, right? Like she's now empowered a congressional committee and subcommittees to investigate the school, and then also specifically the ed school at Harvard as being these sort of incubators of wokeness that are inspiring anti-Semitism and prejudice against white people and all of these other kinds of things. So it's a total clusterfuck is the punchline of that. And we've been in it now in various ways for different reasons on all sorts of fronts for 2 full years. And so I will say that, initially, unlike Columbia, my other alma mater, where I did my graduate work, which Columbia at this point should just shut its doors. I mean, it's like, one of my colleagues at Columbia once said that, Columbia over the years had turned into a hedge fund and a real estate company that offered some classes. And so, there's that, but they just fully caved and they've had 3 presidents in a year and a half. It's just a complete nightmare down there.
The president who got, that display at the graduation with the president getting booed.
Claire Shipman. Oh my God. That was brutal to watch. Could you imagine?
It was brutal to watch, but also appropriate.
Totally deserved. Yeah.
Totally deserved. No confidence from within. It is sort of, I'm taking us down a different road for a second, like a microcosm of what's happening with the government, in the sense that there's this leadership group making these decisions, and they have the money right now and the power to do it, and no confidence from anybody in the organization.
From your people. Yeah. That boo just kept going on, and it was like you thought it was she tried to speak again, and then more boos came. It was like this wave of booze, and again, as someone who but then I was like, no.
And as someone who's participated in a lot of protests, what it takes for a boo like that, I know it sounds trivial, but for a boo like that, in a situation like that to continue for as long as it did. Like the level of animosity from the high percentage of people in the audience has to be so great for that much opposition to be expressed within such a scripted, performative moment. Like, I mean, we've seen hundreds of videos of someone booing Hillary Clinton at a talk, or Israeli leaders
Ted
or Ted Cruz, and they boo, and then other people oppose, and then someone comes in and makes the few people booing go away, and it's over.
Right.
But they could not contain this.
Yeah, anyway. It was fascinating to watch that. It was so hard to watch that because it was like, I mean, on one hand, she's the third, and I don't know, is she interim or permanent? I don't even know what she is at this, but she's the third president in a year, right, at Columbia. That's not a sign that the institution is healthy. And
so it's a different, I mean, they are in a different kind of crisis than Harvard is in.
Yeah, totally. And they have fully caved, right? I mean, that is the characterization that Columbia deserves at this point. It's an embarrassment, especially someone who has 3 degrees from the place. It's a very embarrassing thing. It's like, here, have them back. It's like, Jesus Lord. At our commencement, I actually wore my Columbia doctoral gown, because at commencement you wear your fancy stuff. And there were a group of us on the ed school faculty at Harvard who all went to Columbia, and we were all there kind of in similar times. So we all have these and they're beautiful robes. They're these like slate blue robes. They're gorgeous. I love them. The Queen of me is like, this is but we all walked into the faculty lounge where we were getting ready to walk out to our commencement ceremony, and we all just started laughing at each other because we're all in these like robes, and we're all like Columbia PhDs, and we all just started laughing. I'm like, oh my God, these have become robes of shame. And anyway, so it's interesting because the contrast between what's going on at Columbia and Harvard has been something I've been following very closely, because I have deep investments in both of these and connections to both of these institutions, and the contrast is real. And it's interesting because you contrast the booing of Claire Shipman at the Columbia commencement, with Alan Garber, our president at Harvard, who was the provost under Claudine Gay, and then when she was deposed and removed, although she did resign technically, he became president, and interim president, and now permanent president. And he got a standing ovation, a sustained standing ovation at Harvard from 40,000 people in Tercentenary Theater, which is where we have the morning commencement exercise. And it's like a sea of folks and robes and so forth. And he got up and he said, "Good morning." And the entire place erupted, rose to their feet and erupted in applause for, a while. And, that too, that doesn't happen every day. And standing ovations are, not common, right? You have to earn that. And particularly in a crowd on stage, there's all these faculty who are these are not, the faculty are not known for their, capacity to affirm everyone all the time. And their robust applause of the administration. That's not generally the dynamic. And we're
also in the midst of, I just went to my niece's graduation at Syracuse University. And, you're sort of settling in for a 2-hour extravaganza, right? Like no one's in the headset of erupting in joy.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, it's so goddamn hot. Where's the water? And, exactly. So there's that. So there was that contrast between what happened at Columbia. Columbia's commencement was the week before, and what happened at Harvard in that way. But there was also the contrast between what had happened at Harvard the year before at commencement and what happened this year. So this year we have this standing ovation with 40,000 people of Alan Garber. The year before, there were 1,000 people walked out of commencement. Thousands of people walked out of commencement, and there was also a standing up and a kind of expression of our feelings in that moment. And that was a moment where many of us on the faculty joined the students and other graduates and walked out of Tercentenary Theater in protest. And people were engaging in it for different reasons. Some people were protesting the war in Gaza and the genocide. Some people were calling for Palestinian freedom and rights and liberation. Some people were the impetus for the walkout. The specific impetus for the walkout was that the night before, the Harvard Corporation, our board of trustees, had voted to overturn the faculty's decision, to overturn the disciplinary board's decision to say that a dozen or so students couldn't graduate, and because they had participated in the encampments. So these students have been punished. Part of the discipline was that they could not walk in commencement. They couldn't graduate, and they were withholding their degrees. And then the Faculty of Arts and Sciences overturned the administrative board. And then at the 11th hour, literally the night before commencement, the corporation overruled the faculty. And the faculty was like, oh, hell no. Like, no, this is not what we do. And so people were furious. And so we woke up at like 6 o'clock in the morning to this call for a walkout. So it hadn't really, it was pretty hastily planned, but that was the spark. So that happened last year. And then this year we have a standing ovation for the president, right? Surrounded by the Harvard Corporation. I was like, I mean, talk about non-equilibrium, right? Just the swinging back and forth. So we're in a weird place. And the thing that's hard is that Harvard initially, which led to the standing ovation this year, initially Harvard was like protesting, saying to fuck you to Trump, right? That this is what you're trying to do is an overreach. It's unlawful. It's unconstitutional. We've sued him in several lawsuits that are currently underway and ongoing. So at first, Harvard became like the opposite of Columbia. And there was this refrain on campus that you heard over and over and over again. We're like, we're not going to be Columbia. We're not going to be Columbia. We're not going to be Columbia. That was the like touchstone of what we weren't going to be. So we became very quickly, as you know, right, which is a surprise to any of us at Harvard, or who are usually, used to being hated. We became this global symbol for resistance to the Trump administration's attacks on higher education. And I think rightly so. Like, we did respond, and Garber did, to his credit, did respond that way. But then things get more complicated. So we become this symbol of resistance, lots of applause, standing ovation, right? Goodwill. People are rooting for us. It's all the things. The Onion had an article that said, Harvard surprised that Nation now likes it, or something like that. It was like some very nation rooting for Harvard. There's a first time for everything. And so anyway, that's been interesting. So we went into the summer with that, but with no resolution of the stuff, and the attacks were ongoing. And now over the summer, what you hear every day, there's a deal coming. They're in negotiation. They're having meetings. People are going to the White House. The lawyers are talking. And that's all we hear. We have very little, almost no internal communication from the senior leadership about what's going on. So we're all reading the Crimson and the press and talking to each other, and there's whispers and rumors and all of this, but there's no real information. And what we're watching is the slow dismantling of particularly all of our institutional commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And like offices being shut down, personnel being laid off, renaming of everything to campus and community life, and blah, 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 all this stuff. And so we can't say diversity anymore. We can't say equity. We can whisper it or talk to each other. We can't write it in emails. And we're being told literally not to email each other by the deans and like other people. So like it's a total toxic culture. And so we're like, on the one hand, anxious about, is there a deal? What the hell are they negotiating? Like, what's this going to be like? Is it going to be like Columbia? So there's all of that. And then there's real anger over the dismantling and the changing of things that are not being explained, and that read to many of us who helped build these things, right? There are offices that have been shuttered that I actually helped to build, like positions that I and others advocated to create to support students in the LGBTQ community, students of color, first-gen students, immigrant students. All of that is being dismantled, and there's no explanation for it. In fact, just before I came on here, I got an email from a friend of mine, a colleague who I really like, who's like participating in the dismantling of all this stuff and is now running this renamed office on campus and community life, who sent me this like pablum email that clearly was written by lawyers about how we support all of our students. Right? It's like Harvard's equivalent of All Lives Matter when Black people are slaughtered in the streets, and it's just ridiculous. So anyway, I'm getting worked up, but so there's this, on the one hand, this big narrative about global resistance and Harvard being a hero, and then there's all of this other stuff that's happening that's not being explained, that is driving some of us crazy and making some of us very, very mad. In fact, I've written an op-ed. I co-wrote an op-ed at the very earlier in the summer with Evelyn Hammonds, who's a Black queer woman who was the dean of the college, very distinguished historian of science. And she and I have been kind of co-conspirators on a lot of stuff. And under her deanship was when the Women's Center was created and the Office of BGLTQ Student Life and these new positions of support were there. So everything she led and that I helped with when she was dean is being dismantled. So we wrote a piece in the Harvard Crimson, an op-ed that said, what makes Harvard great? And we said, what makes Harvard greater? It's people, and we're under assault. And that DEI is not an acronym. It's not a set of protocols. It's not some bullshit, boogeyman that the anti-woke people have created. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are values and practices that matter and that make our institutions better than they would be otherwise. And that's the hill I'm dying on right now. And hopefully I won't die on the hill, but you get what I'm saying. So anyway, that's where we are. And who knows if there's a deal? Who knows what's being negotiated, right? Yesterday we had a faculty retreat and everybody's like, what's going on? There's, all at the reception, that was all we were talking about, right? And at the retreat, we had a breakout about, the future of, we can say inclusion and belonging now, but we can't say equity and diversity. I mean, it's the upside down times.
Well, I mean, and there are so many ways to go with this. First of all, like the party supposedly from a propaganda perspective, the anti-cancel culture, anti-language policing culture, and now here we are. But what I want to stay focused on is, one, do you think this was a strategy on the part of leaders in the Harvard Corporation? So we have this moment where, in the first months of the Trump administration, all these huge institutions are capitulating, media institutions, and institutions, legal institutions like Paul Weiss, that have the money and the resources to fight, and they're not doing it. They're just completely rolling over in violation of their own, codes and stated missions,
integrity,
et cetera. And then Harvard stands up, right, and says no, and gets this unbelievable, as you said, wave of goodwill and appreciation and a sort of glow of major resistance that was deserved in the moment. Yeah. And then, as you described, while this deal is being negotiated, they're making all these changes, which for most people are behind the scenes. People can't keep up on which departments Harvard is closing, as LA is being occupied and DC is being occupied. People aren't getting, they're just having the glow of well, Harvard's fighting back.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Because there's all this other stuff, the genocide in Gaza. There's no shortage of things to keep track of. And why would Harvard be on anyone's priority list? I mean, it's on mine because I work there, right?
So do you think this was an active strategy, or do you think they're sort of figuring it out as they go along, and the business side is we can't really fully resist. We're not going to go down like that. So we have to do something. Yeah. We'll do these things and not those things. Do you have a take?
I think it's a mix of that. I think there are people who have seized this moment, right, to do what they've always wanted to do, but haven't had the kind of permission to do, right? And I think about the war in Gaza, Netanyahu, as tragic and terrible, right, as October 7th was, as a kind of murderous spree and the hostage taking, all that, as awful as that was, absolutely, right? Netanyahu has been waiting for something like this to do what he's now doing, right? Yeah. Netanyahu hates Palestinian people. He has always hated Palestinian people, and he wants them gone, right? This is when they said it, this is our 9/11, and Netanyahu had a glint in his eye. I'm like, oh shit, this is going to get bad, right? And so I think there's that's probably not the right comparison because it's not the exact same thing, but people wait for moments where they can have permission to do the things they've always wanted to do. So there are people at Harvard who are absolutely not committed to any of this stuff that I was just talking about. And I know that because there was resistance to it when we were advocating for it. So I know, and some of those people are still in power. So I know that. I can name names if you want. I won't, because I'm not a terrible human, but you know the characters. If you've been there as long as I have, this is my 26th year of teaching, and I went to undergrad there, so I've been affiliated with Harvard since 1989, right? So it's a long time. It's like almost 4 decades. Means I'm old, but so there's some people who like, okay, now we get to do this, and then there are other people who are like, we have to do this, right? And there's the anticipatory obedience, because the fact of the matter is, Trump has not. He said he wants to get rid, woke to die, and to get rid of woke, and he wants to get rid of diversity programs, but there's no law or mandate that we need to rename our things or get rid of certain structures of support or institutions or offices. Like, we're doing that. Right. And by we, I'm not including myself and those of us who care about diversity, equity, inclusion, and students' well-being. But it is being done, right, by people who are making decisions and not explaining their decisions. And so it's a mix, I think. And I think some of them are, if I'm going to extend some grace, I think they probably are like, hey, eventually we're going to have to do this. So let's get ahead of this, and maybe it'll help the deal, right? Maybe the deal will be less bruising, right, on the research money front for international students and so forth. And I can see that. I can see why people might think that. I don't share that thinking, right? I'm not someone who obeys in advance, right? You're gonna have to come for me, right, to make me that afraid or that strategic to make these kinds of decisions which impact people, right?
Well, and it comes down to that thing of like, if you have to give up the thing that represents the principles you stand on to get some part of some other thing, then what have you really gotten at the end?
What are we doing? Like, what are we doing? Like, we should just close our doors, right? And the other thing that's layered into this, which is actually related to October 7th and the war in Gaza and the protests and all of this, is that there's been, and it was also linked to Claudine Gay's demise, was a kind of a claim that people are making, and it's not just at Harvard, it's happening all over the place, that like anti-Semitism is out of control on college campuses, and that this kind of pro-Palestine movement is one of the incubators of it and perpetrators of it, and that Jewish students and Israeli students are not safe anymore on campuses. So they're using the language of like safe spaces and violation of safe spaces, which is also ironic, because they mocked us for saying safe spaces for years, but that's a whole.
Yeah, well, they're better at co-opting language than
right. Amazing, right? It's Orwell. It's right out of Orwell. And so so there's been a weaponization of claims of anti-Semitism. Is there anti-Semitism on college campuses? Of course there is. Like we are diverse institutions with lots of different kinds of people. There is going to be prejudice, voiced and held. But there's also racism on college campuses. There's also homophobia and transphobia. There's misogyny. There's sexual assault. There are all of the worst things in our society are always going to be manifested at universities, because universities represent society in good and bad ways. And so to focus in on anti-Semitism as the problem at Harvard, and then to dismantle DEI in order to fight anti-Semitism, is where we're at. And people are literally linking the claim of the kind of out of control anti-Semitism to the dismantling of DEI, right? And one of the things that's happening, that I'm seeing happening, is that DEI comes from like a bunch of hard fought, battles and advocacy campaigns and efforts to create an institution and mechanisms and supports in an institution that are more inclusive and that make people feel like they belong and that are more equitable and that deal with and address issues of diversity and all of the challenges that come from building a community out of lots of different kinds of people, right? And what's happening now is that you have, and Black people in particular, and people of color, have really led those efforts, and queer folks have led those efforts, and women, right? And now that whole infrastructure is being dismantled in service to fighting anti-Semitism. And what is happening is that there are deep, deep, deep resentments that have been, sort of percolating and now are really manifesting themselves in quite tense and sometimes even ugly ways, where you have like some people who are on the anti-Semitism, fight anti-Semitism train, right, are like, it's anti-racism and DEI and these kinds of things, and i.e. people of color who have, who are the principal kind of perpetrators of anti-Semitism. And then there's these Black folks who are like, we fought real hard for these programs, right? And these kinds of things to be, in the wake of desegregation and integration and all of the racial violence that is tied to that history, right? These programs come out of those struggles to overcome and to deal with America's anti-Blackness and its white supremacy. And so there are all of these sort of divide and conquer things that are manifesting themselves, which is really tragic to watch. Right.
It's heartbreaking. And again, I think some of that goes back to October 7th and the fact that there's a very real, understandable alignment between people of color in the US and the Palestinian struggle. And, in the months after October 7th, as, pro-Zionist people were reading like the extent of the Palestinian support that has now risen up, which I think is a result of decades of organizing.
Absolutely.
And talk about organizing without a lot of hope that your actions will have fruition. I mean, woof. I saw expressed from some pro-Zionist people like a deep disappointment that Black people were not standing with pro-Zionist people about the, attacks of October 7th and anti-Semitism in general, the way that, Zionism and anti-Semitism get very mixed together. And there is, of course, naturally some muddling in there that is real. And then there's a lot of claims of, anti-Semitism by pro-Zionist people against pro-Palestinian protesters. But I think that rift has been exacerbated by this moment. And I have talked about, the insanity, like when I talk on TikTok, about the insanity of, claiming that you're fighting anti-Semitism on campus and then you're closing DEI offices. And I have had people on my feed say DEI doesn't protect Jewish people,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, some people argue that DEI actually is fomenting anti-Semitism, right? And the thing that's interesting to me that I'm seeing is that for some people, the weaponization of anti-Semitism and the singular focus on that as the only prejudice that matters has actually led in some people's minds to a growing anti-Semitism. And there's an irony here, right? And I think that's the wrong response to this crisis, right? It'd be like, oh, there are some Jewish people who are saying that anti-Semitism is the worst thing that's happening on campus, and non-Jewish people too. And so as a result of that, we need to get rid of DEI. And then some people who are angry about the getting rid of DEI are now saying, well, these Jewish people are the problem. It's like, no, people, let's not fall into that vicious cycle and that trap, right? And yet at the same time, we have, this is a very complicated matrix, that we're stuck in, that is really hard to get out of. But the way out of it is not to dismantle the support structures and the practices and the institutional commitments and values that would, in an ideal world, create a multicultural community that can coexist well, learn from each other, respect each other, and these kinds of things. That's the goal, right? That we should be creating that, but you don't do that by dismantling all the things that were put in place to make the community multicultural to begin with, right? And
it is, in his evil genius, like some brilliant divide and conquer within the left. Like he sees the fault lines and he's going right for them, right? But so you're in the institution, all these things are happening. So all these organizations within the institution are being renamed or shifted or closed, right?
Yep. Yes.
So DEI organizations are being renamed or closed or both?
The Women's Center been closed. The Office of BGLTQ Student Life has been closed. The Harvard Foundation for Intercultural and Race Relations has been closed. Not clear where the staff is, whether they're still employed at Harvard or they've been redistributed and renamed in some way or laid off. So all of that is unclear. They're changing names. Now it's campus and community life. We can talk about inclusion and belonging, but not diversity and equity. And just recently, just this week, the Harvard Crimson published an article that at orientation, the students had to go through a mandatory training on anti-Semitism, but no other form of prejudice. So there's no discussion of racism. There's no discussion of sexism or misogyny. No discussion of anti-trans, anti-queer, anti-gay, anti-bi, anti-lesbian prejudice, right? No discussion of any of that. And then there's an orientation program called the First Year Urban Program, which I was a part of, both as a first year coming in, and it was how I got oriented to Harvard, and as a leader subsequently when I was in my sophomore, junior, and senior years. And it's an organization that's been in existence for many, many years, since the 80s, and it was formed to give students a 1-week early pre-orientation public service and social justice experience where we lived in community and we worked in community and we heard from local organizers and leaders and so forth. And this year it still exists, but it's all on campus, and the service programs are not linked to more social justice kinds of organizations or values. And they used to have these evening panels with local activists and lunches on the site and so forth with local activists and organizers. All of that has been taken away because they don't want the students to be connected to these more, what they, I'm sure, think are woke or radical activists in Cambridge and Boston, which to me is like, it's a heartbreak. Because when I think about what I have become as an adult, right, it all goes back to that week that was my introduction to Harvard, where I met the first openly queer people I've ever met, where I was in beloved community with a whole diverse array of my peers, where I learned the neighborhoods and the organizations and the organizing efforts and all of the challenges of segregation and of poverty and of homelessness and these kinds of things in Boston and Cambridge. And it's where I got introduced to people who were involved in ACT UP and Queer Nation when I was in the closet, and to people who were working in solidarity with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and then taking classes in African-American studies and women and gender studies and these kinds of things. All of that has, as you know, as our people here are listening know, has completely transformed and informed the way I've lived my life, right? Our current first-year students are not being exposed to that. So an entire generation of people are not going to have the experience that absolutely changed who I became. And that makes me so angry, and it also breaks my fucking heart. And so these are the human tolls of institutional change in the face of fascism that no one is willing to explain. And I just keep asking, I asked it every session I was in on campus the last 2 days, what problem are these decisions designed to solve? And until someone answers that fucking question, I'm going to keep asking it.
I thank you for your service.
Yeah.
And it is heartbreaking because it is doing exactly what the Trump administration
wants,
and racist white people in this country, racist, patriarchal, Christian people in this country want right now.
Yeah.
Which is that, every person coming into Harvard this week who is not from a white suburb and, didn't grow up going to a country club is going to have a very different experience of arriving at Harvard.
That's right. And pivoting to what we want to talk about next, right? The people who get to come here, getting back to my origin story in this program called FUP, are white Afrikaners from South Africa. They're the people who are welcomed with open arms, right? Not Black people from so-called, shithole nations in Africa and other places in the globe, right? And so it's interesting, and it's an out of body experience, because you have on the one hand this attack. One of the parts of the attack at Harvard is the attack on international students' papers and their visas, making it much harder for students from all over the world to come to Harvard, which is part of its diversity and its multiculturalism, right? And so people who are dying to get in, literally, they want to get, they've been admitted, they've been welcomed, and yet they can't come, or the process of them coming is made more difficult. And then we have, on the other hand, people we know, right, who are leaving the country or getting out of Dodge, because it's just like, I can't bear this. And so both of those things are happening at the same time, where people like, get me out of here, and people who really want to come here. And all of it is being mucked up by the Trump administration.
Yeah, and you're making me realize for the first time, because I don't work in academia, the students starting this year are in a very particular situation, right? Because they applied last fall.
Yeah, that's right.
They got accepted in January, let's say, or February or March, before this intense standoff, which doesn't seem like much of a standoff anymore, between the Trump administration and higher education started happening. So there are all these people who technically were approved, and yet because of Trump's volatility and because these negotiations are still ongoing, like, has there been a drop in the number of students from other countries accepting for this year? Like, we don't know yet what the application drop off for next year will be. I imagine it'll be massive.
Yeah.
But what's the status for those?
One thing we're seeing, we don't have all the data yet, or at least I don't know it yet. I know we had similar acceptance rates, right? Of the people we accepted, a similar high percentage accepted our offer of admissions this year as compared to previous years. So that data point is actually pretty strong. And we know that most right now, at least in the schools where the ed school in particular, the Kennedy school is a little bit of a different situation. We have about 40 some odd percent of our student body is international at the ed school. 60% of the Kennedy school, where I also teach, is international. And so there are lots and lots of like contingency planning and stuff over the summer. And what we now know at the ed school is that most of our international students have been able, it's been harder, but have been able to get their visas so that they can come here and study as students. But we've also launched a new online education leadership program entirely online for international students, and we just welcomed 75 new students who are never going to come to campus and never going to come into the country, who will be able to do their education online. And so we're moving in that direction. And so there's going to be more of those kinds of options to accommodate international students if this monstrosity continues. And so it's tough, but you hear all sorts of stories, and even talking to international students who did manage to get through all of this, it was not easy. I mean, they had to work hard to make this happen, and that's before they register for classes. So you're right, the dynamic on campus, what these students are entering into this year, is not what they imagined it would be when they applied, or even when they got in. And it's a new reality that we're all dealing with and trying to make sense of in real time. And the problem with the Trump administration is, in addition to being an authoritarian regime, it is also a highly, you use the word, volatile group of people, and they change shit all the time, and he lets shit fly out of his mouth and onto Truth Social with no discipline. We know that about him. He's the most undisciplined human being on the planet, which is fun. And so, we're just, every day is a fresh hell, so, and we're just trying to do that. And I just want to be clear, like, we've, spent a lot of time talking about Harvard because that's where I worked. You asked me these questions, and I think it's important. It's an important story, but this is an attack on higher education, and an attack on education and critical thinking, and on the moral commitment to creating robust, equitable, diverse, inclusive institutions of education that can help us live together better and understand each other more deeply. Right? Which is,
well, that's what they don't want.
That's what they don't want. They want to keep us dumb. They want to keep us fighting, and they want to keep us apart, and they want to keep us out.
Yep.
And so they erase the histories. They go to war on woke. They do everything to dismantle and undermine the how these institutions function. And if we don't have an educated citizenry, we have no future as a nation, period. That's why it matters.
Yeah. Well, and of course it's important to, acknowledge that Harvard is a highly moneyed institution where a lot of privileged people get their education who could get educated elsewhere, who probably have more education in their high school than most people get.
That's right.
In their whole lives. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's under attack is because it's the symbol of higher education in our country, even though most of it happens in very different circumstances with very different people. It is the oldest higher education institution. It is the most moneyed. And so if that can crack, then
the whole thing falls apart.
The whole it trickles down through the whole system in very particular ways. So, wait, I just wanted to go 3 different directions. And so I shorted out for a second. But so these international students with extra work have been able to come in and have wanted to still come. Yeah. And yet we know that there are a lot of people no longer choosing to come to the country.
That's right.
People who want to get in who can't get in. Mm-hmm. And then we both know people who are leaving.
That's exactly right. And what do you think about that? I do. Our title that we came up with was Lives in Motion, and there is a lot of movement right now, and it is impacting human beings. Some people are being, forced, coerced, right, constrained in how they can move and not. People are being denied access to the United States. People are being, can't, make full choices of their own volition. But then there are other people who are actually taking it into their own hands, who are saying, I'm out of here. So it's different, right, to be disappeared or deported, right? That's happening, and that's grotesque and violent and monstrous. That's one part of this. But then there are other people who are like, either before that happens to me or of my own volition, I'm getting out of Dodge. I want to leave. And so, and I struggle with this. I think there's a real debate to be had about, should I stay or should I go? That's a real question right now. And it's a pressing one, particularly for folks in our community, for minoritized people who are on the downside of discrimination, the outside of power and privilege, whose rights are on the chopping block and always under assault. So what do you think of that? Where do you line up, or how do you think about that question, both in terms of your own well-being and also in the lives of other people who are, also making these decisions?
Well, I think leaving is a totally valid choice right now, if you can. Yeah. And one of the first things I thought about in the wake of the election was, how do we help trans people in particular get at least from red states to blue states, like even that level of migration. And I'll just do this now before I forget. So I wanted to just mention that there are organizations helping trans people move to safer ground. There's the Black Trans Travel Fund, which actually started very regionally in New York and New Jersey as a way to help Black trans people safely get to their trans care, because sometimes they had to go an hour to a specific doctor or whatever. And, trans people are vulnerable to so much violence, but it has grown from there. There's an organization called Keshet, which is a Jewish LGBTQ organization, and they are giving funds for trans people and their families to move from red states to blue states. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, my personal favorite name, is the Transcontinental Pipeline, which is an organization helping trans people in red states relocate specifically to Colorado, because Colorado is a blue state surrounded by red states. So it's,
with a gay governor.
With a gay governor. So it's an easier move than, and one thing I'm seeing, so I have 2 people close to me who are, have been doing the work of leaving the country. for the last 9 months and will be leaving within the next month or two. And I'm really seeing in real time and up close how much work it takes, and how much resources it takes. You know, and these people I know are at various socioeconomic levels. Obviously, they're both they both do well enough and are comfortable enough to access the resources, have the money for the lawyers. I think you can do it without a lawyer, but it takes, you know, a lawyer just really smooths the way and knows the process better. But it takes a lot. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of money, and it's a lot of money and time that the vast majority of people do not have, you know? So, and you know, I'm thinking about a bunch of things, because one of the questions is, it's possible we won't know it's too late until it's too late.
That's exactly right.
And that's the question. Like, when do you know it's too late? And will you know before it's too late to go? And I recently went in the spring to an Anne Frank exhibit, actually, because anti-Semitism is alive and well. Someone I know, their child is in middle school, you know, social studies class, and they taught about World War II, and they didn't say a single thing about the Holocaust.
Well, that's irresponsible, to say the least.
So the parent in this situation found out that, I think, the Jewish Historical Society, the New York Jewish Historical Society on 15th Street, was doing an Anne Frank exhibit and took their child responsibly.
I heard about this. I know people in New York who've been to it. Yeah.
And you know what? It was a really smart exhibit for that age. You know what I mean? Like, for those of us who care, or for anybody. But I mean, there wasn't a lot of new information for those of us who have looked into these things. But there were, they had replicated parts of the house that Anne Frank and her family and some friends lived in for over a year in hiding in Holland during World War II. But what really has stuck with me in our current situation is how forward-thinking Anne Frank's father was about trying to get them to safety. So he got them from Germany to Holland before it was impossible for Jewish people to get out of Germany. He saw what was coming, and he moved them. So he was, you know, that was ahead, you know. And then he saw in Holland that it was becoming more and more dangerous. And then at some point they were occupied. And in the lead up to that, he was desperately trying to get them out. He was sending letters to friends, family, acquaintances in the United States. He was writing the embassies. They had all the evidence of the work he was doing to try to relocate them before they wouldn't be able to relocate. And then as the doors were closing on that, to use your metaphor, he transferred the assets from his company to the names of his trusted workers who weren't Jewish, so that the government wouldn't seize the company. And then these are the people who fed them and kept them alive for over a year in the annex of this building. And they show you like how the building was built so that from the street, you really wouldn't have known that there was even something back there, much less that people were living back there. And then the tragedy that, you know, they were so close. They were so close to making it.
Yeah.
I mean, they were found, I think, 10 months before the war ended.
Yeah.
So this question of when will we know it's too late, you know, and will we know in time? And also, like, more and more, I'm just saying, like, we're being run by mentally ill people, right? Like, this level of sadism, this level of cruelty, it's a mental illness. And mental illnesses are progressive. Sadism, you know, like, is never sated, right? So, like, right now, and we've talked about this before, they want the people they don't like out.
That's right.
But they're also now empowered and funded to triple the number of prisons and places of incarceration in our country, and when is out not enough, and when will it be gone, non-existent?
That's right.
We don't know. So
I mean, they're building concentration camps in the United States right now. We know this, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have at least one. We have more than one is the truth. I mean, we talked about this last time, that devastating article about one of the ICE detention centers in Louisiana. I mean, in terms of ICE's operations, like, there have been problems for decades. It's always been inhumane. We just now have an administration that's reveling in the cruelty and inhumanity, and using it as a point of pride and advertisement for what they're doing, which is backfiring on them, but to some extent. But so, I mean, this is what I'm grappling. These are the things I'm grappling with when I think about the relocating. And I ask myself if we're not being stupid by not trying to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, that phrase that has been popularized recently by Tim Snyder, the historian at Yale, who has gone to Vancouver, I think, or Toronto, somewhere in Canada. Toronto.
Which was actually in the works before Trump got elected, which I didn't know first. So this was his last year, but he had made that agreement. There are two other professors.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a cluster of them that have moved, and I know others who are in the process of it as well, academics who are doing this. And he has that phrase, anticipatory obedience, right? That's the first way that you know that you're on a slippery slope of ascendant fascism, of ascendant authoritarianism to the slippery slope of fascism and tyranny is that, right? Is the people obey in advance or think they need to, so they give permission to the authoritarians to oppress them, right? But there's also, I think, anticipatory disobedience, right? Which gets at what you're talking about, which is, I'm going to get out of here before they find me, before they disappear me, or before they deport me, or before they, do something to me, occupy my city, or what have you. And we're seeing all of these various things happening. And I think about now that the big, beautiful bill comes with incredible resources that only expand the ranks and the work of ICE. I mean, joining ICE now is one of the great government-funded upward mobility programs in the United States, right? I mean, they've doubled the salaries. They're doing loan forgiveness for people who have college educations. They have all sorts of perks and benefits and so forth. They're advertising specifically in, various communities that they think there's going to be a lot of, interest in, right? These young, disgruntled, white guys may or may not have a college education who have kind of become intoxicated with MAGA and the what is it? The manosphere? What do they call it? The
manosphere. Yeah.
Who the hell wants to be there? But anyway, but notwithstanding, and so you have this basically a standing army of people whose job it is to disappear and deport people and to make their lives hell through surveillance and targeted forms of violence and intimidation and these kinds of things. And it's all part of the larger piece. And so getting back to your point, like, who wouldn't want to get the fuck out of Dodge if you can get the fuck out of Dodge before they occupy Dodge, which they're doing. And so I don't begrudge anyone to do it. That said, I do think the resource piece and the labor piece, the amount of time and money that it takes and strategy that it takes to do it is not something that everyone has in abundance or the luxury to do. And so that's real too. So there are deep inequities within this kind of decision making around whether or not to leave or stay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a 1% thing. It's not a 5% thing. I would say it's a 20% thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And for sure. And people are making different decisions for different reasons with different resources and all of that. but I also think, I get troubled, I think, by the sort of the claim that like, oh, these people are all privileged. And I'm like, a lot of the people that I know who are leaving are people from already vulnerable and minoritized populations, right? Trans people, queer folks of color, people of color more broadly, right? There are a lot of people who are leaving the country who don't have privilege, who are literally on the downside of discrimination, outside of power and privilege. And so to call their decision to leave before they get disappeared or deported or intimidated or attacked, right? It feels to me privilege is not the right word to describe that. I don't think, even though
I don't think so. And also I think really discounts
the horror,
what it means to make that choice. I mean, one of the people I know who's leaving is trans, and like they're literally like, because they're going to Spain, they're not going like to the next state over where you fill a U-Haul and then, so they're literally like selling off all their belongings
and going across
to help fund like the grief, the pain, the like, like to know that they are no longer safe where they live and feel that deeply that this is what they need to do for their safety, and therefore have to like they rent their home, they love their home, like they feel deeply connected to their home, they're having to leave it, like the choices and the heartbreak I think get very discounted with this finger pointing privilege thing. And I also think, I was actually at a music event and I met this woman who was from an Eastern European country, smaller one. And I'm going to have that moment. It was funny because we joked about it because she either said, I'm from Slovenia or I'm from Slovakia. She's from Slovakia, I think. And I was like, wait, is that one or that one? And she was like, the fact that you even know there are two puts you like so far.
1%, right.
Exactly.
Right.
And the one she's from, I feel so ridiculous right now, had gone fascist, and we were talking about this country now, and she said, I felt really guilty leaving, but actually I was a much more effective advocate, not in the daily insanity.
Yeah, no, that's real. I feel that too, because I do feel like we're all going mad in both meanings of the word, right? Crazy and angry. But
exactly.
and I also, I'm a big believer. The Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement gave us the language of like trust Black people and trust women, right? Believe them when they tell their stories and they explain their lived experience of what it means to be subjected to the kind of violences that women and Black people and Black women are subjected to. Like, believe them. And I feel a similar kind of impulse in this moment to be like, people are making decisions for complex reasons, and this is not an easy decision to make or to execute under any circumstances, particularly these. And so I'm not going to second guess or judge people who are making those decisions. And, I think the unfortunate thing is that the people who get the high profile people whose choices we get to hear about, right, who have moved are the Rosie O'Donnells and the Tim Snyders and the Ellen and Portia DeGeneres. What is Portia de Rossi?
Ellen DeGeneres, Portia de Rossi.
Yes, right. I'm trying to mash them together. Anyway, but we hear about them leaving, and then I think it's easy to say, "Oh, that's a Yale professor. These are celebrities, whatever." But even that, I'm like, look, like good for them. Like, they've made their decision and they're explaining it. And yes, is there resource privilege there in some cases, of course, but it's just not that simple. And I think about this within the context of, you mentioned those organizations, the Transcontinental Pipeline in Keshet and the Black Trans Fund. Did you say? Is that what it was called?
Black Trans Travel Fund.
Travel Fund.
And
right.
I'll link to all of those below the video.
Awesome. Yeah, no, the great organizations all doing really wonderful work. And there's another organization that my friend Kamali Powell used to run. He's now a fellow with our program at the Carr Center, and it's called Rainbow Railroad, which of course was started to help with the relocation of folks who are refugees, asylum seekers from, really, really tough places for LGBTQ identified people and relocate them in other places. And one of those places, in addition to Canada, where Kamali and the organization were based, was the United States. And in a different time. Now the United States has become hostile territory, as we well know, because we're both queer, for LGBTQ folks and other people. And so now, Kamali and I were just talking about this recently. Now the United States, the calls that Rainbow Railroad is getting, say a hotline, the calls that Rainbow Railroad are getting from people who want to be relocated are coming from the United States now, not just from places like Russia and Uganda and other places that are horrible for queer people to live in. And I think he mentioned that the United States is now one of the top countries for callers to Rainbow Railroad for assistance, and it's mostly trans people and trans people of color who are asking for this. And so now the internal relocation and also external relocation is they're serving people in the United States now more than they have ever done. And that feels to me, and so one of the things that he's working on is a really powerful project is like, what do we do with the categories of asylum seeker and refugee when we're talking about people who are internally displaced or who are asking for assistance to relocate from, like, say, Massachusetts to Colorado or whatever, or Mississippi to Colorado. So anyway, so it's just like another level of this, these lives in motion, is that people are choosing to migrate or being migrated or forced to migrate in ways that, these are new phenomena. And, and I want to say and be honest that, I've thought about it too, right? And speaking of some a degree of privilege, my husband and I, when we were in Paris, we were sitting around one night and we were having some drinks, and it was our last night in Paris, and we were actually at the cafe where the magazine where that published Baldwin's essay "Everybody's Protest Novel," which is a critique of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and Richard Wright's Native Son, and it was upstairs from this cafe that they got in their big fight, where Richard Wright and James Baldwin were having their fight.
You were cafe.
Like, we were drinking with the ancestors, and we were having a great conversation, and we were reminiscing about when we both read Giovanni's Room in college and all these things. But one of the things my husband said to me, he just looked at me, he said, and he had this kind of like spiritual, like, freedom and peace that we don't often have here. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, if we could figure out a way to get Rogers, our dog, our chocolate lab, if we could find a way to get Rogers over here, I wouldn't go back. And he said that so matter-of-factly, and he's a gay Black man, right? And living in the United States, not an easy existence by any means. And the truth of what he said just hit me like a brick. And I remember thinking, I don't want to go back either. And, when we think about Baldwin and Wright and so many Black writers and queer people who lived in exile in the middle of the century during Jim Crow and the racism of that system, and they left. Josephine Baker, right? There's so many folks left and went abroad, and so there's a rich tradition of this. But it hit me so hard when he said that, because he was so matter of fact about it, and I believed him to his bones, right? That he would do this. And we have been thinking about what it would mean to relocate. I'm having some conversations with some folks in Ireland, in Dublin, which is a place I have some connection to, and so we are definitely that is in motion. Whether it's a plan that will come into fruition is still a question mark, and we haven't done any of the details. But the conversations are in motion about our lives and bodies in motion.
And you can definitely get Rogers over there, because all the people I know relocating have pets. So
yes, Rogers could probably swim there. He's like an Olympian caliber dog in that way. But we'll get him on a boat or something. We'll get him over there. But there's a world where I think I know a lot of people who are thinking about these things, who are contemplating them, right? And that is true, a sign of these wretched times, and how we. And particularly those of us who are in more vulnerable populations and communities, like how we survive and get through this, what we can only call a state of emergency. And that's a pivot to the last thing we wanted to talk about, which is Rebecca Solnit's work and the
meditations on an emergency.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say, going into this, like, you said the word not second guessing people who are leaving. And the truth is, I second guess myself.
Yeah, I do too. I
second guess myself for not saying, this is bad. Mm-hmm. It's going to get worse. Is it going to be safe? Should we be protecting ourselves? And right now, and I mean, it would take a lot of work. And now I'm more aware of how much work it would take given watching these people. But I do have the ability to do it. It would be hard. It would be taxing. It would be a lot of things, but I am lucky enough to be able to do it. And I wonder pretty much every day if it's not some kind of naive, or not naive, but like, I'm really seeing all the reasons people don't leave now, right? Because we look back at Germany 1935 and we wonder why everybody didn't leave, right? Yeah. Like it's like, whoa, didn't you know? Like, wouldn't it have been obvious to get out? And I see the power of like routine. I see the power of home and connection to people. Like, I have a trans friend in New York who probably has the resources to go. Again, it would not, it's not like he could go and live in a palace in the south of France, but like it could happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this person has children.
That's right. I mean,
I don't want to live in a country other than where my kids live. I have a friend who's Venezuelan American in LA, and she could figure it out.
Yeah.
It would take a lot of work,
yeah,
but she could figure it out. And her mother lives with her and has a lot of healthcare needs that are being met in Los Angeles right now. Now, also, they're all in more danger, but like, you know what I mean? I see like what the ties of community and daily life and ritual are, and how violent it is to break them, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you had mentioned that, because I mean, you've met my parents who now live close by. They live in South Yarmouth, and I'm an only child, and I am very close with my parents. They're lovely human beings, and we're very, very, very close. We see each other a lot, although not as much as my mother would like, which she reminds me every time I talk to her. And she's right, of course. My mother's always right. And but I mean, that would be one reason why I would stay. They're 81 and 82. My dad just turned 82. My mom will be 81 in September, and and they're doing well. They're in reasonably good health, and they're sharp as a tack, and they're fired up, and about everything that's going on. But I'm not sure they would like up and go to Dublin with us, like, I mean, and I would kind of want them to, right? And CJ's parents as well are both living, and dad lives in Florida, mom lives in California, and he has his sister in Las Vegas, Nevada. And so, and we're close to our families, and they mean a lot to us. And, is everybody going to like up and move to Dublin? And would Dublin be the place all of them would want to go? My mom and dad are like, yeah, take us to Dublin. They love Dublin. But, and that's where I think I would want to go. But I mean, CJ and I would have to chat about that too, right? I mean, there are lots of places, but, those bonds of family in particular, and to our parents, aging parents, and it's very specifically are certainly things that tug against the choice to go, even though we too have the resources to do it. It would be a pain in the ass, and there's lots of logistics to work out and so forth. And, it would be sad on some level. It would be very hard. But we could do it resource wise, right? We have that, and we're lucky in that way. But whether we do is another matter. And then there's also the thing for, people like us, we're fighters. We're not afraid of the fight. We dream of a better world, and we bust our ass to build it, right, in our own ways, right? And you through your art and your activism, and me through my teaching and my activism, and we're creatives in our own ways. Music and art and writing and theater and all the things that we do and that we're good at. right? And that have impacts on people. Could we do that anywhere, everywhere? Probably, but there's also a way in which we're connected to communities and institutions and industries and fields and all of that, and to move your life somewhere else is always going to be disruptive, and may mean that certain things end.
And it is a certain surrender, right? It is a certain I mean, I think it's a life, and I say this without judgment of what other people are doing, but within my own psyche, it feels like a surrender. It feels like a giving up. And the truth is, and I I hesitate as a white girl, I think like that woman said to me, she was better able and more effective at resisting what was happening in her country from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Very interesting thing. And I think, so there's that perspective. I keep wanting to talk about James Baldwin going to Paris, but I'm just not going to do it because my life is not what James Baldwin's life was in 1951 when he went to Paris. So I just feel like that's not appropriate. So I second guess myself every day about it. And then did you watch this Frontline that came out about a month ago with Steve Bannon in it? There have been some clips going.
God, no.
So there's this clip that came on my feed that I watched, and he was so clear. He was like, these institutions, they're not that strong. Democrats believe in all these institutions, but they're not. Look, the media is already falling. The universities, they're not that strong. He was like, the courts, whatever. And then he said, we're battle hardened and we are not stopping.
I know.
And the truth is, I knew that, like I could see that.
Yeah, but he just said it.
Saying it so clearly has been like, I have just been like processing it for a month.
It's haunting. It's haunting when you hear them say that, because and Steve Miller does similar things where he'll just, the evil in his eye, and he'll just look at the camera and look at who's asked him the question and be like, yeah, we're going to get rid of him. I mean, it's like,
and so then from there, trying to swing it back around to Rebecca Solnit.
Yeah.
I've really been sitting with like, things are going to get worse. Right. And again, I knew that. But like there are different levels of understanding, and to see how bad it is already, and nobody knew how quickly they were going to move. Nobody knew how frighteningly.
Speaking of lives in motion, they got right to it.
And we didn't know. We knew the agenda. We did not know how violently, how forcefully they would come in and dismantle, the systems of government, violate court orders. We just didn't know the speed and the totality with which they would enact this agenda, right?
And also the surgical nature of it, right? One of the things that I have been kind of impressed by, not impressed in a yay, but impressed in a wow, is the surgical nature of it. And you see it just for a second, going back to the Harvard example, like all the different ways, the international students, the visas, the patents, the research funding, the DEI, anti-woke stuff, all of these, congressional investigations, subpoenas, like there are so many different levers that they are using to do this work, to exact and execute literally their work. And that's happening everywhere, right? They got to work fast, and they have a broad agenda, and also lots of different tools that they're using and people that they're empowering to do this work. And it's absolutely terrifying, and you said before, you said surrender, and I sort of bristled when you said that, because it did feel a little judgy, but I know what you mean by surrender. The word I keep coming back to is sort of resignation. Like we're resigned to the horror of this. It doesn't mean we accept it, right? But there's a way that we're resigned to it, and moving maybe is one way to claim agency, right, in the context of a regime that is trying to strip us of all of that.
It's a huge way to claim agency, absolutely.
No.
But I think for me, wrestling with like the knowledge and the awareness that they will keep going forward until they are stopped.
That's right.
And what is that? Is that a military coup? Is that, you know, he invades another country and then we're in a war? Like what, like
right. What is it? Yeah.
Literally, what is it? And that until then, they're going to keep doing exactly what they're doing. And I've been sort of sitting with this, and then I received Rebecca Solnit's Meditations on an Emergency, and it was kind of a smackdown. So it was called, I'm just looking it up right now, On Not Surrendering in Advance or at Any Point Thereafter.
I love Rebecca Solnit. She's just
I know.
Or at any point subsequent to that. Yeah.
And there's a reason why sports teams don't chant, "I believe that we will lose" before a game. A reason so obvious that I'm pretty sure it needs no explanation in that context. Then she goes on to talk about the people who are kind of, you know, broadcasting their cynicism all over social media, people from the left. And the truth is, I am not doing that. So from that standpoint,
I'm not either. Yeah, right.
No, but I am looking at my own, where do I feel defeated before the full defeat has happened, I guess, within my psyche.
Yeah.
And I'm not, you know, I'm taking action, and I support people taking action, and I don't cynically cut down action, which a lot of people are doing. But you know, she goes on to talk very eloquently about, you know, all the people who have resisted in dangerous situations and actually won things. She goes on to say, you know, authoritarian powers are not all powerful.
That's right.
And the people are not lacking all power.
That's right.
And change and victory and shifting is happening all the time. And, you know, to decide that it's all over before it's all over gives them power they don't actually fully have yet.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So this is right and correct. And how do we, like, I am a real, maybe it's because I'm a Scorpio, I loathe, like, I really loathe toxic positivity. Like, I really loathe, like, a sort of like, let's do some affirmations when you don't feel well. Like, this is just
when you want to just punch somebody in the fucking face. I know. It's totally true.
And so how to stay with the danger of the moment, the true reality of the violence being inflicted, the level of suffering that is happening, you know, primarily in this country right now for immigrants, you know, and trans people, and then stay engaged. And, you know, this is the challenge. And it's taking me longer than I would have liked to sort of calibrate myself to that challenge. It doesn't mean I'm not doing anything. I wrote my representative the other day. I did an action a couple of weeks ago, still sick. I was like the infectious disease on the side of the did you know they were doing these overpass actions?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I went to one of those. But it's tricky, and I just want to read in this piece, she quoted Vaclav Havel. And this is something he wrote, you know, I don't know if he wrote it when he was a political prisoner or after he was a political prisoner in Czechoslovakia. I don't know if he wrote it when he became president, but, you know, people are telling these stories. Like, could he have known when he was sitting in jail in Czechoslovakia that like 2 years later they overthrew the government and he would become president? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote the kind of hope I often think about, especially in situations that are particularly hopeless, such as prison, I understand above all as a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. It is a dimension of the soul. It's not essentially dependent on some particular observation of the world or estimate of the situation. Hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. Hope, in this deep and powerful sense, is not the same as joy that things are going well or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed.
Wow, I love that. I love that. I love that. Yeah.
And I mean, this is, you know, what we're being called to. And like we've talked about, it takes a lot of work to stay in that space.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. You know, I have so many things in my head right now because there's you said you loathe the toxic positivity, and you said because you're a Scorpio, and I also hate hokey hope. And you know, I'm as you know, I'm of Irish descent, and there's that famous Yeats line, right? Like, being Irish, he had an abiding sense of tragedy which sustained him through temporary periods of joy. It's not that you can't get to the joy, but it's the tragedy, the realization, the resignation to tragedy is just like part of the kind of the DNA or the makeup. And it's one of the reasons why I think Irish people are so good at gallows humor, right? Because they're like, gallows humor is the joke you make at the gallows, right? Or if you're in the gallows or you're watching the gallows, right? There's just like, well, let's, you know, it's like jokes at funerals, right? And we're good at that. It's what we do, right? It's why Irish people are good eulogists as well. And why we always go to a pub right after the funeral. And so anyway, all that is like a mix of messy things, but I resonate deeply with that. And yet at the same time, knowing that we do have to get to joy, that joy is helpful in sustaining us, and that hope is necessary in the darkest places, the most difficult places. I did this seminar earlier in the summer with that was drawn from Daisaku Ikeda's work, and he has this wonderful essay where he talks about hope as a choice, that we have to keep choosing hope, right? Especially in moments where it's really, really hard. And I think that is important, but it's also a struggle, right? Because sort of joy and pain and hope and despair and you know, these kinds of moments and other moments that are easier or not states of emergency are always like, they're always tangled up simultaneously. They coexist, right? I think that's the conflict that we always feel. And it was interesting because, you know, now I'm thinking about poetry. As I told you, Andrea Gibson's poetry is something I've just recently been introduced to, ironically and sadly, I think, and embarrassingly, upon their death recently, right? When Gibson died of cancer, I believe, and passed. And so many people I know, right, many of them queer women, were so like, wrote these really beautiful tributes to them and their poetry. And so I went to Women Crafts last week, and I bought a copy of the third collection of Gibson's poetry called Pansies. And there's a beautiful poem called Elbow or Elbows, I believe. And I don't have it in front of me, but I one of the things that just like stopped me in my tracks on the ferry, and I was coming home last night from Cambridge back to Provincetown, and I was reading the book and her poems, and this poem struck me because in the middle of this poem is this moment she's talking about how hard it is for her to be sort of in public, or how hard it was for them to be in public and to be viewed all the time and visible and so forth. But there's this beautiful moment in the poem where they talk about when you're sitting in the middle seat on an airplane and your elbow touches the person who's sitting next to you, and the impulse is to move your elbow so that it's not touching. And what they write in the poem is that that it's our job in life to keep our elbows touching, because it's how we connect. And it just took my breath away, this line, and I'm not doing service to it. Next time when we get together, I will read this specific passage. It had multiple things in the poem, but the piece about the elbows, and that it's our job in life, right, to stay connected. And I just found that to be so simple and so beautiful.
I think that's a lovely way to end. And I think the truth is, like, whatever in this moment, like, whatever can help you keep your elbows connected is the thing to do, right? And if that's, you have to leave the country because you're not going to be able to stay elbows connected here, right, that's what you have to do. If you have to get really local and stay in your community and do work to like shore up your community, that's the right thing to do. Like, I think the level of attack right now is so deeply personal and so particularly violent that people have to find a lot of different ways to keep their elbows connected.
Yeah. Well, this is why we do this little thing that we do here on Breakdown, is that we try to keep our elbows connected, and my elbow is always connected to yours.
You have your elbows. Right. Gotcha.
All right. Till next time.
Till next time. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you to the people watching. And I hope everybody gets to stay connected to some love and joy.